Zhou Yifan, of all people, was probably the last person anyone would expect to discover something truly groundbreaking in the world of elemental magic. If anyone had asked him a week ago, he'd have confidently answered that his only notable skill was the ability to fail in more creative ways than most. Take today, for example, the classroom at the Academy of Elemental Arts was a mess. Fire-flavored steam was rising in the corner from a half-baked experiment, a pile of earth had tumbled from a shelf and was now blocking the door, and the air smelled like wet laundry left out too long in the rain. As for the water, it had pooled in the far corner, leaking from a crack in the ceiling, courtesy of Yifan's latest, great, attempt at summoning a rainstorm. Sitting slumped at his desk, Yifan stared at the ruins of his latest failure. A half-melted potato sat on the top of his desk, its surface glowing faintly, an unintended byproduct of an attempt to manifest a fireball. His classmates snickered quietly in the background, one of them snapping a picture on their enchanted phone probably to share it with the entire campus later. All right, he muttered under his breath. Not the worst disaster I've had today. Yifan had been attending the academy for 2 years now, and he had yet to pass a single practical magic exam. He was a perennial underachiever, always aiming for the stars, only to hit the ground with a spectacular crash. Magic just wasn't his thing, it seemed. Where others conjured firestorms or mastered manipulating air currents with ease, Yifan could barely make a spark without burning down the entire room. A voice from the front of the classroom broke his reverie. Professor Hu, a tall, imposing figure with a permanent frown etched into his face, eyed the classroom with a look of pure disappointment. Zhou Yifan, the professor began, his voice like gravel, this experiment, or whatever you call it, does not reflect the standard of this academy. This is a place for serious practitioners of elemental magic, not for whatever this is. Sorry, Professor, Yifan replied, trying to stifle a sigh. Maybe I'll try again next semester. I'll try again next semester, the professor snapped back. Maybe, just maybe, you'll learn something about discipline. Magic isn't a joke, Yifan. You can't just fling elements together and expect something decent to come of it. Yifan nodded, but his mind was already drifting. That was the problem, wasn't it? He wasn't a serious student of magic. He wasn't serious about anything, really. But what if just for once he did something crazy? What if the real issue wasn't his lack of magical skill, but rather the rigid way everyone thought about magic? He glanced around the classroom. His classmates were busy scribbling notes, trying their best to pretend they weren't laughing. It was too much. Yifan had been coasting by for too long, barely passing tests and keeping his head down. Maybe it was time for a change. What if the elements didn't have to be separate? Yifan didn't know exactly where the thought came from, but it was like a spark inside his mind. He had read about ancient texts that mentioned a deeper level of magic, one that wasn't confined by the standard elemental rules. 4 elements: fire, earth, water, and air. In most practical magic, these were separate forces, each with its own set of laws, limitations, and practitioners. But what if they didn't have to be? Why couldn't they be combined? In one swift motion, Yifan pushed the remnants of his potato to the side, wiping his hands on his robe. Let's do this, he whispered to himself. He closed his eyes and focused. For once, he didn't follow the formula taught by the professors, the rules that had shaped his failures for years. He wasn't trying to conjure just one element, he wasn't even interested in controlling any one of them. No. He was thinking bigger now. What if fire could mix with water? What would happen if earth and air weren't isolated, but instead fused into something new, something entirely different? He began with a small spark of fire, the familiar warmth pulsing in his fingertips. But instead of pushing it into a tight ball or sending it floating into the air, he let it grow, expanding it outward, feeling the heat radiate through his chest. His breath deepened, the flame growing hotter and wilder. Next, he conjured water, a thin stream that flowed out of his hand. It wasn't much, just a trickle, but he had a feeling that if he combined the two, something extraordinary might happen. He couldn't explain why, but his gut told him to do it. the water touched the fire. The result was instantaneous, a burst of steam, an explosion of mist, swirling into a mass that turned into a strange, glowing object, a ball of hot, damp air. It felt alive, almost as if the forces he'd fused together were vibrating with energy. The air, water, fire, and earth he'd summoned a fusion, but that wasn't the end of it. As he stared, dumbfounded, the fusion expanded. The air swirled faster, the earth underneath his feet trembled, and the fire grew hotter, engulfing the room. The faint smell of burning wood mixed with the scent of salt water, the classroom transforming before his eyes into something different that he gasped as he looked around. The walls of the classroom were now replaced with jagged cliffs, rising out of a deep, lush jungle, the air warm with mist. A sea breeze blew through the windows that no longer existed, and there floating in front of him was a glowing, pulsating sea turtle, hovering mid-air. It seemed to gaze at him knowingly, as if it had always existed for this very moment. What is this? Yi-Fun muttered. His heart pounded. His hands trembled. The fusion was a mess, but it was alive, somehow, and he had created it. Before he could think any further, the door to the classroom slammed open, and a collective gasp swept through the students gathered outside. Professor Hu stormed in, eyes wide with shock, followed by several other faculty members, their faces a mixture of awe and terror. Yi-Fun turned toward them, wide-eyed. Professor? I might have messed up a little. The professor, looking like he was about to burst a blood vessel, finally said, Messed up? You've opened a gateway to, and then, before anyone could react, a colossal figure of light appeared in the center of the room, towering over them all. A voice, deep and ancient, filled the room, reverberating in the air. Who dares disturb the balance of the elements? Yi-Fun froze. The voice didn't seem to come from any one person. It seemed to echo from the very elements themselves, as though the earth, the air, the fire, and the water were speaking in unison. Yi-Fun, the voice continued, you have awakened us. You have dared to combine the forces that have long been kept separate. You, mortal, have broken the laws of nature. Yi-Fun gulped. I didn't mean to. But the figure didn't listen. It grew, swirling and spinning like a tornado made of living light. It was massive, a thing of pure power, and Yi-Fun realized too late that his experiments had set something far more dangerous into motion. The figure before Yi-Fun shimmered, growing more solid with every passing second. He could feel the temperature rising, the air around him swirling with an energy he could neither understand nor control. The sea turtle he had created fluttered in the air next to him, its glow now pulsing as if it too sensed the immense power gathering. Who are you? Yi-Fun asked, his voice barely above a whisper, more out of instinct than any real bravery. He wanted to take a step back, but his feet felt rooted to the spot, as if the earth itself had claimed him. The classroom, or whatever this space had become, was no longer a place of study. It was something else, a liminal space between worlds. Between powers that shouldn't exist together. The towering figure, an amalgamation of swirling light and elemental energy, spoke again, its voice an ancient chorus. I am the guardian of the elements, the one who watches over the balance of fire, water, earth, and air. You have disturbed that balance. The consequences are unforgivable. Yi-Fun felt a wave of panic rise inside him, but also something else, defiance. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. This wasn't supposed to happen. He wasn't supposed to be the one who unleashed the power of the ancient gods, the one who risked everything for the sake of experimentation. He had only been trying to learn. Was that so wrong? Wait, he blurted out, his heart pounding in his chest. I didn't mean to do this. I was just trying to see if the elements could be combined. I didn't think. You didn't think? The voice of the guardian rumbled like a storm. You thought the elements could be treated as playthings? They are forces beyond your understanding, mortal. You cannot wield them as you wish. You have disturbed a balance older than time itself. Yi-Fun felt the weight of the words pressing on him, and for a moment, he feared he might be swallowed by them. He didn't know what was going to happen next, but he had a feeling it wasn't going to be pretty. However, amidst the fear, there was something else stirring within him, an unfamiliar sense of clarity. It wasn't just the elements, but the truth that had been right under his nose all along. The elements weren't separate. They weren't supposed to be. No, Yifan said, more to himself than anyone else, they're not. They can be combined. I just need to prove it. The guardian loomed over him, a column of living force. For a moment, Yifan wondered if the being was about to strike him down, but instead, the energy seemed to recede, as though waiting for something, perhaps even him. You are a fool, the voice intoned, softer now, almost curious. But your foolery has awakened something long dormant. You must face the consequences of your actions, mortal. And yet, perhaps, you may learn something before your end. Before Yifan could even react, the figure dissolved into a whirlwind of light and elemental energy, leaving him breathless and standing in the transformed classroom. He blinked, and suddenly, the storm of energy had stopped. The room had returned to its original form, save for one thing. The sea turtle was still floating before him, glowing faintly in the dim light. But it wasn't the same. There was something ancient and wise in its gaze now, something beyond a simple creation of magic. Yifan took a step forward, reaching out to touch it, but the turtle darted away, its glowing form flickering like a candle in the wind. It seemed to want him to follow. Without thinking, Yifan moved after it. The strange creature led him through the wreckage of the classroom and into the courtyard beyond, the air outside crisp and cool. But the turtle didn't stop. It continued to hover just out of reach, leading him toward the edge of the academy grounds. As Yifan followed, he couldn't help but feel that this moment was important, critical, even. His every instinct told him that something big was happening, and he was at the center of it. He hadn't realized it at first, but the landscape around him was shifting. The winds had picked up, and the trees seemed to sway in strange, unnatural patterns, as if reacting to something deeper. He could hear distant rumblings in the sky, thunder, though there was no storm to accompany it. Then, out of nowhere, the turtle darted through the air, its glow intensifying as it sped ahead. Wait. Where are you going? Yifan shouted, but the turtle ignored him, disappearing into the distance. Yifan quickened his pace, the strange sense of urgency in his chest growing stronger. It was then that he saw it through the shifting branches of the trees. A massive figure was standing in the distance. It was a person, but not quite. A giant, made entirely of stone and earth, its massive form looming over the forest like a living mountain. Yifan stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes went wide. This was no ordinary figure. This was something more. Something ancient. The turtle hovered before the giant, glowing with a fierce, radiant light, and Yifan felt a jolt of recognition, a connection between the turtle and the stone giant. He wasn't sure how he knew it, but somehow, the turtle was leading him to meet the earth giant. It was no accident. As he took a step closer, the ground trembled beneath his feet, and the giant turned to face him. Its eyes, glowing like molten rock, fixed on Yifan, and the air around them seemed to hum with power. Who are you, mortal? The earth giant's voice boomed, its tone like the deep rumble of an earthquake. Yifan's heart was racing now. He had seen the elemental spirits before, of course, in books and scrolls. But they had always seemed like distant myths, figures from the past, powerful and unreachable. To be standing before one now, and to be the one they were addressing, felt unreal. I'm Yifan, he stammered, trying to keep his voice steady. I didn't mean to disturb anything. I just wanted to learn. The giant's gaze softened ever so slightly, and for a brief moment, Yifan thought he might be spared. But then, the turtle glowed again, and the moment passed. The earth giant raised its massive hand, and Yifan knew that this wasn't an encounter meant for mercy. You have called forth the forces of creation, the giant said, its voice deep and commanding. But you have yet to understand them. You must learn to master the elements, or be destroyed by them. Yifan swallowed hard. There was no way out. no way to escape the consequences of his actions. But one thing became crystal clear in that moment: if he was going to survive, he would have to learn everything there was to know about the elements, everything that had been hidden for centuries, and so began his journey. A journey that would take him far beyond the walls of the academy, beyond the world he had known, and deep into the mysteries of the ancient powers that shaped existence itself. Yifan stood frozen, staring up at the earth giant, feeling the weight of its gaze like a boulder pressing against his chest. The air around him felt dense, charged with ancient power, as if the very earth itself was watching him, judging him. The sea turtle hovered a few feet away, its glow pulsating as it seemed to urge him forward. "You must master the fusion you have awakened," the earth giant said, its voice like the grinding of tectonic plates. "It is not something to be taken lightly, mortal. It is not a simple matter of force, but of harmony. The elements must be in balance." Yifan's mind raced. Master the fusion? Harmony? What did it all mean? He had stumbled into this mess, hoping for nothing more than to prove a small theory, an idea that the elements could work together. Now, he was standing before a creature that made the very ground tremble, surrounded by the waking powers of the world, and he had no idea what to do next. I don't understand," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but the giant heard him nonetheless. The earth giant's eyes, glowing like molten rock, seemed to soften. A deep rumbling sound emanated from its chest, like the sound of an avalanche deep beneath the earth. "You will understand soon enough," it said. "But first, you must prove yourself worthy of the power you seek to control." With a flick of its massive hand, the ground beneath Yifan's feet shifted, and before he could react, the earth cracked open, creating a deep chasm that yawned before him. It wasn't just a crack, it was an abyss, stretching wide, its depths unfathomable. Yifan stumbled back, eyes wide with fear. His heart raced, his breath coming in shallow gasps. The turtle had moved again, darting down into the chasm, its glowing shell shimmering as it led the way. It was as though it was guiding him into the very heart of the world itself, into the place where these forces were born. "Follow it," the earth giant commanded, its voice shaking the ground. "You will find the answers you seek below." Yifan hesitated. Everything in him screamed to turn and run, to find safety, to return to the comfort of the academy. But he knew he couldn't. He had awakened something far greater than himself, and now he had to face it. He had no choice. The chasm seemed to pulse with life as he stepped forward, the walls shifting and grinding like they were alive. The turtle's light led him deeper, and the path became more treacherous. The rocks beneath his feet were jagged, the air thick with the scent of earth and ancient stone. Every step felt like it was taking him further away from the world he knew, into the unknown. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of walking, he reached a vast cavern. The walls of the cavern were covered in ancient carving symbols that glowed faintly, etched into the stone like the language of the gods themselves. At the center of the cavern stood a massive stone pedestal, upon which rested a crystalline orb, glowing with an inner fire that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the earth. Yifan stepped forward, drawn to it like a moth to a flame. As his fingers brushed against the orb, a surge of energy shot through him, like a bolt of lightning coursing through his veins. He gasped, stumbling back as the power surged, threatening to overwhelm him. But the turtle was there again, floating in front of him, its eyes locked onto his, as though urging him to continue. The earth giant's voice filled the cavern, booming from every direction. "The crystal you touch contains the knowledge of the elements. It is the key to understanding the balance you have disturbed. You must harness its power, or the elements will consume you." Yifan's heart raced. The power within the crystal was overwhelming, too much to grasp all at once. But the turtle nudged him forward, and Yifan, with a deep breath, reached out again. This time, he grasped the orb firmly in both hands, feeling its heat, its life force, thrumming through him. The moment his hands made contact, the world exploded around him. The cavern, the chasm, the earth itself seemed to dissolve, and Yifan found himself standing on the edge of a vast plain, the sky above him swirling with thunderclouds. He was no longer in the cavern. He was somewhere else, somewhere between worlds. The elements surrounded him, alive and in motion. He could feel the fire, the water, the air, the earth, all alive within him, swirling together in a dance of pure power. For a moment, Yifan was consumed by it. He could feel the fire licking at his skin, the water pulling him down, the earth shaking beneath his feet, the air pushing and pulling at him, controlling him. It was intoxicating, like a drug, and for the briefest of moments, Yifan lost himself in the chaos, but then, just as quickly as it had begun, the storm stilled. Yifan's breath came in ragged gasps. He felt as if he had been pulled through the very fabric of existence and back again. The world around him had returned to its original form, but everything had changed. He was no longer just a student, no longer just a failure. He was something else now, something more. The turtle floated before him once again, its eyes glowing with a quiet understanding. You have touched the heart of the elements, the earth giant's voice echoed in the air. Now you must learn to control it. The fusion you have awakened is no longer just an accident. It is a power you must wield. But be warned, mortal control is not a given. The elements will only yield to you if you prove worthy. Yifan nodded, his mind whirling. Control. The words reverberated in his head. He had to control it, he had to master the fusion. If he didn't, everything he had awakened, everything he had disturbed, would consume him. I understand, he said, his voice hoarse. The giant's form began to dissipate, its presence fading into the air like dust. The turtle, still glowing softly, seemed to smile at him before it darted off into the distance, its light growing faint. As the last vestiges of the giant's presence vanished, Yifan stood alone in the vast expanse of the plain, the weight of his new reality settling over him. There was no going back now. The elements had chosen him, and he had no choice but to learn from them. With a deep breath, Yifan turned away from the place where the earth giant had once stood, the power of the fusion still swirling in his chest. He knew that his journey was far from over. There was so much more to learn, so much more to discover. And he would need every ounce of his strength to master the forces he had unleashed. But for the first time, Yifan felt something he had never known before. Not fear. Not doubt, hope. He wasn't sure what lay ahead, but he knew this: if he could master the fusion of the elements, he could change the world. And maybe, just maybe, he would finally find a place where he truly belonged.